Please be seated. The court is now in session. For today's proceeding, we will continue to hear the testimony of the witness, and the floor will be given to the two defense teams. The floor is now given to Nuon Chia's defense to continue putting questions to the witness. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, Counsel. Good morning, Mr. Witness. I would like to ask you some more questions on the events of 17 April and the days after. Mr. Witness, what could you tell the Chamber about the final attack on the fortress of Tolpo Tre? When did the attack start?
For the final attack, that is in 74 through 1975, the attack was at Tulpuchre village.
Do you remember when the final attack on the fort started? Was that on 17 April?
I cannot recall the exact date, but I only can recall the year.
But could it be that the final attack on the fortress was on 17 April?
The attack at Tulpuchre battlefield occurred in 1975. However, prior to 17 April 1975, the attack was ongoing, and only after the fall of Phnom Penh on the 17 April 1975, I entered Phnom Penh at around 9 or 10 a.m. So actually I was 1 hour behind the arrival in Phnom Penh. That was at 9 a.m.
Okay, let me ask it differently, Mr. Witness. At what moment did the Lon Nol soldiers who were stationed at the fort in Tolpo Tre surrender themselves?
It was on the 17th April. That was the only time they surrendered, because the force arrived in Phnom Penh at 9 a.m. and we arrived at around 10 or 11 a.m. on that morning.
Could you tell the Chamber a little bit more how that went? How did the Lon Nol soldiers surrender themselves? Did they come out of the fort with their hands up, for instance?
Of course, they raised the white flag in all the barracks in the fortress. It's a sign of surrender.
And did you see that with your own eyes? The Lon Nol soldiers with the white flag coming out of the barracks?
Yes, I saw it with my own eyes. The white flag was raised at the fortress, and another flag was raised outside the fortress. And at that time, then we entered the fortress after we saw the white flag raised.
And at that moment in time when you saw the soldiers and the white flag, are you able to estimate about how many soldiers there were around the barracks and around the fortress?
It is my estimation there were about 100 soldiers. However, there were several commandos surrounding the fortress. However, this is purely based on my estimation.
I understand. Do you remember how they were dressed? Did they wear their uniform, or were they in civilian clothes?
They wore different kinds of clothes. The soldiers dressed in their military uniforms. As for the commandos, they wore civilian clothing.
And once they had surrendered themselves, do you know what happened with the group of soldiers and commandos?
Nothing happened to them. We settled in there together and we collected the weapons, and then we put them into a separate group with the weapons piled in one place. And my team was a separate group. As for the commanders of the military and the commandos, they led their own groups, and later on I left to the region.
And do you know how long this group of Lon Nol soldiers from the fortress and those commandos stayed together? Were they together all day?
I could not know because I already had left until I arrived at the Posat, and then I returned to Angkor district. So I could not know what happened at the back.
Have you heard from others, your colleagues at the time, how this group of Lon Nol soldiers and commandos reached the provincial townhouse?
My group actually left. As for the commandos, they still remained at their barrack.
My question to you, Mr. Witness, if you have heard at that time or maybe later how this group of soldiers who had just surrendered went from their barracks, where they were being held, to the provincial townhouse.
I did not hear from anyone regarding those people as I left and then arrived at a provincial town, and then further I went to Angkor district by truck.
Have you heard anything from your colleagues at the time or later, at a later stage, if those Lon Nol soldiers who were still wearing uniforms were allowed to dress into civilian clothes?
No, they did not change their uniforms. So the military remained in their military uniforms.
Do you know whether this group, when they arrived at the provincial townhouse, had always stayed together? So when they were going from the barracks to the provincial townhouse, were they always together, or were they allowed to leave?
I could not grasp the situation. Those soldiers were on their own with their own group, and my group was separate from them. So let me clarify this matter.
Do you know, because you have seen it or you have heard it, if other groups of Lon Nol soldiers, for instance from other parts of the Pursat province, were directed or were sent to the provincial townhouse, or was it only the group from the fortress at Tolpo Tray which was sent to the provincial house?
They were not sent to anywhere. They remained where they were. For example, those from Pochray would remain at Pochray, and at the provincial town hall, they all stayed in their respective units.
Maybe I wasn't clear enough, Mr. Widders, I apologize. But my question was the Lon Nol soldiers. There was one group going from Tuopo Che to the provincial townhouse. Do you know if there were other groups of Lon Nol soldiers from other parts of the province that were sent to the provincial townhouse?
No, nobody was sent to the provincial town hall. They remained at where they were.
At one point in time, you were stationed at a checkpoint in Po, nearby. Is that correct?
I think it's a bit confusing. When I return, And in fact, on the 17th April 1975, I went further and I did not return back. So it's difficult to respond to your question.
Maybe I have misunderstood you, but it was my understanding that after the capture of the fortress, you were stationed as a guard with your platoon at the intersection or at the checkpoint of Po, correct?
President, witness, please wait. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. My objection to counsel's questions is that he's not specifying the time period here. He was asking questions about the 17th of April. I think he's now asking questions about a different time period, and that may be part of the problem he's having. So if he was more specific in the time period, in his questions to the witness, I think we'd be getting better answers, more clear answers from the witness.
Mr. President, I agree. But I try to do it in a different way. But I'll focus on the chronology. Mr. Witness, can you remember where you went after the Lon Nol soldiers had surrendered and were gathered together? Where did you go?
As I indicated earlier, I went further up to the provincial town hall and then I went to Angkor district.
Do you remember the exact time when you saw the trucks with the Lon Nol soldiers coming from the fortress and going to the provincial town?
That is incorrect.
Please correct me, Mr. Witness.
Soldiers were transported from provincial town hall to Tulpu Chre, but it was not the other way around. For that reason, I could not respond to your last question.
I understand, Mr. Witness, but I'm trying to find out if you know anything about the way the soldiers were transported from the fort in Tulpu Chre to the provincial town hall.
I do not know how to respond to your question. I only knew that they were transported from the provincial town hall to Tulpu Chre.
I understand that, Mr. Witness, but at one point they were at the fort in Tulpu Chre, and at one point they were at the provincial town hall. My question is if you know how they arrived coming from the fort and arrived at the provincial town hall. How did that go? Did you see that?
I did not know or did not see any soldiers who were being transported from Tulpu Chre to the provincial town hall.
And is it correct to say that you also didn't see any other groups of soldiers coming from other parts of the province entering the town of Pusat to go to this meeting at the provincial town hall?
That is correct. I did not see. It was one time that I was stationing near the Po district, but the timeline that you asked, that was the time that I did not see any.
Okay, Mr. Witness, now let us go back to the moment that you saw the trucks with the Lon Nol soldiers passing by. Yesterday, you testified that you saw between 10 and 15 trucks passing by, and in those trucks were people sitting. You had one night's sleep, and maybe you have been thinking about it a little more. Are you sure the trucks that you saw were in the number between 10 and 50?
It's been so long already, because the year is now 2013. I could only recall that soldiers were transported by trucks to Tupu Chre. Maybe my estimation of 15 trucks were not correct.
Was it maybe 10, 11, 12, 13?
If my estimation of 15 trucks may not be correct, I wish not to make another estimation. Because I myself did not go and see the actual numbers myself.
That is something I do not understand, Mr. Witness. You have testified yesterday that you saw between 10 and 15 trucks. Earlier to the investigating judges, you were talking about maybe 30 trucks. Yesterday you were quite specific that you saw between 10 and 15 trucks. Are you now saying that you didn't see trucks, or am I mistaken?
I knew that there were 15 trucks, but of course the situation at that time was rather confusing, so I cannot put the exact figure to the number of trucks there were. I could say there were about 15 trucks, but I did not just stand there and count the number of trucks.
Very well, Mr. Witness. Are you able, from your memory, to describe what kind of trucks you saw?
The trucks were kind of the military trucks, CMC trucks, with the culvert at the back. That were the kind of trucks used. Or we sometimes refer to it as on-call vehicles or trucks.
So were they all military trucks? Or were there also civilian trucks in that convoy?
There were less military tracks than the civilian tracks, and civilian tracks with the covered at the back for transporting goods were also used. And as for the military tracks, there were about 2 or 3 10-wheel CMC tracks.
And would you be able to remember how many trucks were civilian trucks and how many trucks were military? Was it half-half? Was it 2/3, 1/3?
I cannot recall it for sure, but there were less military tracks than the civilian tracks.
And did I understand correctly when you said that not only the military trucks but also the civilian trucks were covered, that the back was covered?
No, they were not fully covered. You could see the opening at the back of the truck because it was the hot season at the time.
Did that apply to all trucks? Were you able to see in the inside of the back of all trucks?
The tracks were not covered, so we could see people standing on the tracks.
The people that you saw in those trucks, were there people dressed in military uniforms?
Soldiers wore the military uniforms, that is, the clothing and the boots as well. They also have their backpack with them.
Did you also see civilians?
No. There were no civilians mixed with the soldiers. They were only the file and rank soldiers and military officers on the tracks.
So the trucks that you saw going from the provincial town hall to Tupo Tray were filled only with people wearing uniforms, and some of them, or more, a lot of them had their military backpacks with them. Is that correct?
Response: yes, it is correct. People had to pack because they were told earlier on that they would be attending a study session, and they prepared for the session. They could not go there empty-handed, but they were not armed.
How do you know that the people, that the military you saw in uniform in those trucks had just come from that study session in the provincial town hall? How do you know that?
Response: I knew about this through my commander.
I'll go back to the civilians. Did you see any civilians in this convoy of trucks which were carrying the military?
Response: no, there was no civilian seen on those trucks. They were all soldiers.
Are you able to tell us how many soldiers were sitting in each of those approximately 15 trucks?
Response: it depends. Some trucks could accommodate 30 people. Some could even accommodate up to 40 people, because these people had to stand when on the trucks. And I didn't care to count the number of people on the trucks, because every time the first leg was filled, then the trucks would have to leave the premises to portray. And then I would hear radio communication to us, ordering us to release few more trucks after the previous ones already left.
So, Ms. Witness, are you saying that when one truck was sent from this intersection at Po to Tu Po Tre, they were all, the people inside the truck were wearing a military uniform, correct?
Response: I think we seem to be on different pages here. Now, when you refer to the soldiers, you appear to be referring to Khmer Rouge soldiers other than the Lon Nol soldiers. But the fact is that the military, the Lon Nol soldiers, were those who seen on the trucks being transported to Tuol Po Tre. Please distinguish between the term military and soldiers. Soldiers here referring to the Khmer Rouge, rather the Lon Nol soldiers, when the military referring to rather the Khmer Rouge soldiers.
Just to be very clear, Mr. Witness, when I was asking about the people who were sitting in the trucks, which had just been coming from the provincial town hall, were those Lon Nol soldiers, or were those your colleagues?
Response: we, the Khmer Rouge soldiers, did not have anything to do with the trucks. We were not on these trucks. Only the Lon Nol soldiers would be the one supposed to be transported to Tuol Po Tre.
That's what I was thinking as well. And just to be 100% sure, those Lon Nol soldiers were wearing uniforms, according to you, correct?
Response: yes, I am 100% sure that it is correct, because Khmer Rouge soldiers were wearing different uniforms, when the Lone Nol soldiers would be wearing different uniforms. So Lone Nol soldiers had their boots and their military uniforms. The Khmer Rouge soldiers would be wearing the cat-tire sandals instead of the boots. And it was not difficult to identify the Lone Nol soldiers because they were wearing some logos representing the Lone Nol soldiers, and the Khmer Rouge soldiers did not have anything to wear as logos like that.
And when the trucks went one by one to Tu Po Tre, and when they came back empty, when they were sent there to Tu Po Tre, there were Lone Nol soldiers in there wearing their uniform. Am I correct?
Response. I don't know how I can really respond to your question time and again when I made it very clear that they were all soldiers.
Well, Mr. Witness, the reason that I'm trying to be very sure about things is that somebody who testified earlier this week has explained the trial chamber that the people coming from the provincial town hall going to Tu Po Tre, which were in the trucks, were all wearing civilian clothes, and that it was not possible to see any things like signs for ranks or anything that indicated that they were soldiers. That's why I'm trying to be very precise.
Response. In short, the soldiers who were executed at Tu Po Tre would have their uniforms removed and their backpacks removed, including the boots, and then the Khmer Rouge would bring back only these belongings.
But it is your testimony that when they were executed, they were still wearing their military gear. Is that correct?
Response. They were wearing the uniforms indeed when they were executed, but after that the Khmer Rouge soldiers would remove some belongings, including the watches, the wrist watches, and the backpacks, and these are the items that the Khmer Rouge soldiers would remove from the dead bodies.
Do you know whether that day there were also people wearing only civilian clothes were being brought to Tu Po Tre in order to be executed?
Response. I don't know, or I don't remember having seen any civilian being brought to Tu Po Tre for execution.
But could you think about it again? Did you see in the backs of those 15 trucks any people not wearing a military uniform?
Response. To my knowledge, I never saw anyone at the back of these trucks was wearing civilian uniform or clothes.
Did you see that day any civilians in normal cars going to the same place where the military trucks with the soldiers were going? And did you see them, that they were gathering, the civilians were, if civilians were gathering with the military?
Response. No, that was not the case. Absolutely, only soldiers would be transported to this location because no civilian would be allowed to access to that location, because normally before someone could gain access to this Tulpochre or Po village, they had to have some permits, and with that I can say that no civilian would ever be allowed to access to this location.
Now, let me rephrase the question, Mr. Witness. Do you know if that day also people only wearing civilian clothes were executed at Tulpo Tray?
Response. I didn't say this. I can't tell.
Very well. Now I come to an important subject, Mr. Witness. Yesterday, I asked you briefly about how many people in total would fit into 15 trucks. And I asked you the question, if it were indeed 15 trucks that you saw, and there were about 30 people average in those trucks, I asked you to tell me and the chamber how many people in total were in the trucks. Do you remember me asking you that?
Response. I have already testified that the numbers of trucks could not be very certain. I still stand by my estimation that it could have been 15 trucks, and that number of people could vary from one truck to another when they were loaded. That's my point.
I understand, Mr. Witness, but my question then and my question now is, if you saw 15 trucks and in each truck there were about 30 to 40 people in the trucks, how many people in total were going from the provincial townhouse in this convoy to Tulpo Tray? How many in total? And I will, now that I see my learned friend standing, let me explain why this point is so important for the defense. And I will put it in the question, if you like.
The President, Mr. Witness, please hold on, and co-prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. The questioning is getting rather repetitive. This witness has been asked this a number of times. Counsel is now asking, I believe, asking the witness to engage in multiplication I think this is getting to the point of badgering this witness. He's made it clear that he's not someone who received a detailed education in mathematics and is able to do that. He's given us on many, many times now his best estimates of the number of trucks, his best estimate of the number of people on trucks, and also his best estimate of the total number of people. We can all do the math and that, but I just do not see the point of continuing to ask repetitive questions that seem intended to badger this witness.
Mr. President, may I reply? Yesterday, I think I was very withholding toward the witness about the question or his capacity to calculate. The reason that I'm returning to this point is the following. When you read closing order in respect of two-boat trade, and when you go to paragraph 708, in that paragraph 708, it's argued or reasoned as follows. It says the victims arrived at the provincial headquarters compound by their own accord. It was estimated that approximately 3,000 were gathered in the compound to attend this meeting. The only evidence that the investigating judges have is his testimony to the OCIJ that there were in fact 3,000 people going from the provincial town hall to two-boat trade. So the number of 3,000 is coming from this witness and from this witness alone. If he was witness number 30, number 31, I wouldn't be bothering asking these questions for a second time. But it is crucial for this case to be able to establish whether it was a group of 200, maybe 300, or in fact 3,000 that was sent from the provincial town hall to two-boat trade. Just have a look. I invite you, Mr. President and Your Honours, to have a look at paragraph 708 and see how important it is to have this number established in a correct way.
Mr. President, if I just may respond briefly, that is a flat-out misrepresentation of the record. He may have picked a certain citation here, but I was just reading a statement of another person interviewed by OCIJ who provided his estimate of the number of trucks and people. There are many witnesses who have provided estimates of the number of trucks, number of people that they saw being transported that day. So to represent to this court that this witness is the only person who has provided that information is simply a gross misstatement of the investigative record. For that reason, I think this witness has provided his best estimates. I simply do not see the point of engaging in a mathematics exercise with him.
Please allow me, Mr. President. I invite the Chamber to go to that paragraph, to go to footnote 3049, to see who is quoted in respect of that footnote. It's this witness only, and it is the number of 3,000 only, and from no other witness is this number coming. So it is crucial that we establish that.
The President. The objection lodged by co-prosecutor concerning the line of questioning by counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea to the witness is sustained as the question itself is repetitive. The witness is now directed not to respond to the question, and the chamber wishes to inform Mr. Koppe that with regard to the numbers of trucks or people, in this case the chamber has already heard a lot already, so you would be now asked to proceed to another question and avoid this repetitive question.
I beg to disagree, Mr. President. You've only heard one witness so far about how many people were in those trucks. It was the witness of earlier this week, and he said there were about 200. And he's saying 3,000, and there's no other evidence. But I will continue. Mr. Witness, in your statement to the OCIJ, that is E3/364, English page 002-50759, Khmer 002-42422, and French 002-8497. And I quote, on about 19 or 20 April 1975, I received orders to assemble the soldiers and policemen from low to high rank who had connections to the Lon Nol era and kill them at Bantai Potre in Kanding district. Could you expand more on, Mr. Witness, on what you meant when you said, I received orders to assemble the soldiers? From who did you get those orders, and how did you assemble those soldiers?
Response. I received order from the zone committee, and the order was rendered down to the sector committee and further.
But what did you mean when you said that you received orders to, and I quote, assemble the soldiers? What did you mean with that?
That means I was asked to assemble soldiers with ranks to attend a study session. That's all.
But those soldiers were already in one group together after they had surrendered. Remember, we were talking about them having the white flag, etc. When you were ordered to assemble them, what did you mean? Did you have to physically get them from somewhere, physically bring them somewhere?
Response. I think we did not need to physically gather people. We just passed the message on to their group leaders. The message would then be relayed, and then these leaders would then pass on this order to their subordinates or soldiers. And then the soldiers would gather eventually.
So you were not yourself physically involved in taking lone wolf soldiers from one place and bring them to another place. Is that correct?
Response: yes, it is. I just communicated this message to their superior, then the superior would pass on the message to their subordinates, and people could then be gathered.
Do you know whether there were also lone wolf soldiers who were not at the fortress being picked up from various places, for instance their home? Maybe they were off duty and they were taken from their homes?
Response: on that day, soldiers were kept in that place. They were not allowed to leave their fortress. And in some cases, if these people were off duty or soldiers were off duty when they were needed, then we had to pick them up from the places where they were. But in such situation, they were there in one place.
But do you remember whether there were standing orders to go from one house to another house and to look for lone wolf soldiers who were not actively in duty at that time?
Response: at a later date, people were demobilized and they had to go to different places, and for example, they had to be dispatched to different cooperatives. That was the responsibility by the district committees or the head of cooperatives to gather the people if they were needed. That's another case.
Let me be more specific in time, Mr. Witness. I'm referring to the period between, on the one hand, the capture or the surrender of the lone wolf soldiers in the fort, and on the other hand, the meeting at the provincial town hall. Were there orders in that particular period to search houses, find lone wolf soldiers?
No, there was no order to search. We or they stayed in their respective units, and we only informed the commanders or the heads of the unit, and we did not go around and searching the houses.
Do you know if in that very same period people were asked to come to the provincial town hall through loudspeakers? Were there loudspeakers being used to have lone wolf officials or soldiers going to the provincial townhouse?
The zone committee made such an announcement. So the information or the instruction was relayed from the zones to the provincial governor for the gathering of soldiers at the various locations, but the information was only given to the commanders, and the commanders would gather their subordinates.
So do I understand correctly when you're saying that officials from the Lon Nol regime were called upon through means of loudspeakers on the street to go to the meeting at the provincial town hall?
ហើយពួកមន្ត្រីពួករាជការរដ្ឋការទាំងអស់នោះក៏បានមកប្រជុំនៅសាលាខេត្តដែរតើអញ្ចឹងដែរឬទេ
Of course, when the announcement was made, they would come.
Now, have you heard in those days, or on the day of the meeting in the provincial town hall, how many military, how many former Lon Nol soldiers were in the provincial townhouse, and how many civilians, how many Lon Nol officials were gathered together in the townhouse?
ប្រមាណដែលមករួមប្រជុំនៅសាលាខេត្តនៅថ្ងៃនោះ
I could not say. There was a meeting for them to prepare their belongings. For instance, tomorrow they would be sent for a study session, and they would do so. But you know, the information was not just for them to prepare and to leave immediately.
But do you know whether during this meeting in the provincial town hall, the military who were wearing their uniforms were in the majority, or were it the civilians who were in the majority?
ទាហាននឹងភាគច្រើនឬក៏អ្នកស្លៀកជនស៊ីវិលភាគច្រើននៅពេលប្រជុំនោះតាមដែលលោកមើលឃើញឬក៏ដឹងនោះ
There were soldiers and there was no civilian. At that time, the instruction was clear. It was the gathering only for the soldiers, not for the civilians. So the civilians had no business to go for a study session.
But, Mr. Witness, you just testified that there was a call upon, I formalize it, neutral people through the means of loudspeakers to come to this meeting in the provincial town hall. Isn't that correct?
My response was that only the commanders were informed, or the instruction was relayed through the provincial governor, and the provincial governor down to the military commanders. So that was the change of the relay of the instructions.
How do you know that there were no civilians in that meeting in the provincial town hall?
I knew it because the instructions were specific. That was the concrete plan for the meetings for the soldiers, not for the civilians. So civilians had no business to attend that meeting unless they stole uniforms, that is military uniforms, and wore the uniforms in order to attend the meeting.
Have you ever been inside of the provincial town building in the period April 75 and before?
នៅពេលថ្ងៃនៅមុនថ្ងៃ17ខែមេសាឆ្នាំ75តើលោកធ្លាប់ចូលក្នុងអគារសាលាខេត្តនោះដែរឬទេ
It happened before the 17th April 1975, so I did not dare enter the town hall. I only went into the town hall after the 17th April 1975. If I were to go into the town hall before 17th April 1975, then the soldiers would arrest me.
I understand. Do you remember when exactly you were inside the building of the provincial town hall after 17 April 1975?
ខែនោះគឺឲ្យបានថ្ងៃដែលជាក់លាក់ហ្នឹងគឺក្រោយ17មេសាឆ្នាំ75ហ្នឹងគឺនៅថ្ងៃណាដែរដែលលោកចូលនៅក្នុងនោះ
It was 2 days after the 17th April 1975. So I went quickly into the town hall and then I left for Kroko district. And only later when I came back to station. So I was there only for a short while before I went to Kroko district.
Mr. Witness, would you be able to give an estimate as to how many people you think would fit in the big room of the provincial town hall?
ខេត្តនោះតើលោកស្មានមើលអាចទុកមនុស្សបានប្រមាណអ្នកដែរនៅក្នុងបន្ទប់ហ្នឹងតាមលោកស្មានលោកគិតទៅមើល
It's difficult to say because there were different offices and there was a meeting place about the size of this courtroom. So it could fit hundreds of soldiers. But meetings could be held in smaller offices within the provincial town hall that each room could hold about 20 people. Could hold rather.
I'm now asking you specifically about the meeting in which it was conveyed to the people who were present that they were going on a study session and that they might even be meeting the king. Have you heard from anybody, or have you been able to see for yourself how many people in total attended that very specific meeting in which it was said that people were going to study sessions?
I could not say for sure as I did not go around and counting the people there.
Just to be clear, you haven't heard a number of the total amount of people being present at that meeting. You didn't hear the number of 100 or 200 or 300.
That is correct. Nobody told me the number. So the meeting took place, then I went to my own place. I did not care anybody would tell me about the numbers of people attending the meeting. Because I was only waiting for my instruction to carry out my duties. That was all.
let me go back, Mr. Witness, to a moment in time before that. You have testified yesterday that a meeting was held in which it was decided that Lon Nol soldiers were to be executed. Do you remember any other details that were conveyed to you by your regiment commander about that meeting? Do you remember, for instance, whether there was talking on the meeting about what was to happen specifically to Commander and Deputy Commander Pell and Roux?
No, I did not know, because the distance was far. It was more than 10 kilometers, so I would not know what happened down there.
My question was related to the meeting in which it was decided that people were allegedly to be executed. Do you know if at that particular meeting anything was discussed or said about what was to happen to Commander Pell and Deputy Commander Roux?
I was not told anything because we were separate from them. They were on the military side. I was not told that they would be shot dead. The only information that I received was that the ranking officers would be sent for a study session.
Have you heard from anybody in those days or later that Commander Pell and Deputy Commander Roux their heads were decapitated?
No, I did not know about that. As I said, the distance from their location and mine was more than 10 kilometers.
Do you remember if there was, with you or with any other of your colleagues, any feeling of having revenge on Commander Pell and Deputy Commander Roux for the things they had been doing prior to 17 April 1975?
I do not know what to respond to your question.
I will explain my question, Mr. Witness. There might be evidence suggesting that Commanders Roux and Pell's heads were decapitated. And there might be evidence which suggests that that was done maybe out of revenge. My question to you is whether you know or whether you remember anybody saying anything about those two people which would suggest that revenge measures were taken.
President, witness, please hold. The co-prosecutor, you may proceed.
Yes, Mr. President. The question, counsel is attempting to lead the witness by suggesting that there is evidence that these were revenge killings. I am not aware of any such evidence I think he is misleading the witness. It's rather plain from the facts here that there's no suggestion that these organized killings were revenge killings. So I think it's fine for him to ask the question, but he should not be suggesting to the witness that there is evidence that these were revenge killings.
Very well, Mr. President, I will rephrase. Have you heard, Mr. Witness, anything in those days about colleagues of yours seeking to specifically revenge Commander Pell or Commander Roux?
No, I did not know if anyone were to seek revenge against anybody else. It was their own business. Because Pal and Run was the loyal soldiers, and I did not know whether they sought revenge amongst themselves. Taking revenge or not was their own business, and I could not know about that.
Mr. Witness, have you ever heard anything which might suggest that after the Lon Nol soldiers were killed, that their houses in which they lived were searched and that maybe property was seized from those houses?
No, I did not hear about that. What I knew was the soldiers were sent for the study sessions, and later on they were demobilized both in Phnom Penh and Posat. So I did not know about any house searches.
Mr. Witness, have you ever heard that in the period between the surrender of the fortress and the meeting in the provincial townhouse, Lon Nol soldiers or former Lon Nol soldiers from other areas in the country came into Pursat, for instance from Phnom Penh or from Battambang?
No. For those who were in Posat will be gathered in Posat, and for other places like Battambang or Mong, they will be gathered at their respective locations. So they would do it in their respective locations. It's not the gathering from all other places at the provincial town hall. So for those around the provincial town hall would gather at the provincial town hall. For the rest, they will be gathered at their respective locations. So it was kind of a segmented gathering and not a collective gathering at the town hall. So this meant that for each respective district, the gathering would be at their district. For example, at Bakan or at other districts.
Mr. Witness, do you know whether in the period between the surrender of the Lon Nol soldiers at Tulpo Tray and the meeting at the provincial town hall, checkpoints had been set up on Route 5, National Route 5, checking everybody coming from the direction of Phnom Penh and everybody checking who was coming from Battambang?
No. Because after the 17th April 1975 came the peacetime, there were no checkpoints. Because by that time there were no vehicle traffic on road. Only when there were instructions for the vehicle passing through, then we could see vehicles. Otherwise, nobody could travel anywhere freely.
Mr. Witness, do you have information to suggest that the Lon Nol soldiers that we have been speaking about all morning were soldiers stationed in either Tulpo Tray or in Pursat province?
As I said, soldiers were stationed at their respective barracks, for example, at Po or at Tulpo Tray. For example, at Svai Bantil, there will be a group stationed there. So they stationed at their respective assigned locations.
Let me rephrase, Mr. Witness. Do you know whether the Lon Nol soldiers who were allegedly executed were Lon Nol soldiers from the Pursat province only?
Let me say this, those soldiers at the Pursat province would be gathered there. However, for example, at the Kroko district or Bakon district, they would be gathered at their own respective districts, not going through the provincial town. So let me repeat, they would be gathered at their station.
Let me try it in another manner, Mr. Witness. Maybe you don't understand me correctly. What I'm trying to find out is if you know whether the Lon Nol soldiers who were allegedly executed were coming from the fortress at Tulpo Tray or Po Village Fort, or whatever you want to call it.
I said that they were gathered at the provincial town hall and they will be sent off.
Mr. President, I'm going to a completely different topic relating to what the witness knows about our client. It is maybe a good moment to pause, otherwise I'll just continue.
President, thank you. The time is now appropriate for a short break. We will take 20 minutes break and return at 10 to 11. Court officer and the greffier, could you assist the witness during the break and have him return to the courtroom at 10 to 11.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រកឈរ